every now and again we have a special guest on, and today we have an extremely special guest. I've got a funny tale of how I met this chap, which I shall recount in a second. If you can imagine, I was out in the fen, I'd found a fish trap, and I was a bit angry. I was on my boat. I'd already phoned the EA, and I was waiting for the enforcement officer to turn up. And then this chap came walking along the bank and ducked down behind a load of reeds, right next to where I found this trap. So I started my outboard engine, and I quickly whizzed back to where I found the trap, and I started shouting at this occupant who was hiding in the reeds. And all I could hear back was vol, vol, vol. And I thought to myself, that's a strange tone. What language is he talking? But no, it wasn't the person responsible for the fish trap. It was Peter Beckenham, Middle Level Commissioner's Conservation Officer. So welcome to the podcast, Peter.
Thanks very much.
But you were checking your vole trap, weren't you, that day?
Yeah, that's right. That was a site where I have a water vole raft. So I check it sort of regularly during the sort of summer season to see if, I can find traces of water voles there. And on that day, I don't think I did, but obviously I found you.
You found me instead. A rabid fenman.
It's amazing who you meet out in the middle of nowhere. So.
Oh, to be fair, we had a lovely conversation, and you spent over an hour trying to find any more fish traps. And you were doing the bank, and I was doing from the water. So that was great. And from there, we've kept in touch, and now we are here. Yeah. So what we're going to do, we're going to explain Peter's role at the Middle Level Commissioners. We're also going to explain how we're kind of partnering up, aren't we? So there's lots of things happening through the podcast and the Fenland Guardian scheme. And Peter's going to explain to listeners how listeners can help with data that he needs for lots of projects that are ongoing. And that'll be a bit later on the podcast. I think first though, Peter, just so everyone knows, could you explain a bit about the Middle Level Commissioners?
Yeah, so the Middle Level Commissioners, we've been in existence in our current form since 1862. And for anyone who drives or walks around the fen, you'll see a lot of the long, straight drains sort of crisscrossing the landscape, and we're responsible for managing these drains, managing the water levels. We cover a vast area, so it's about 270 square kilometres, ranging from Peterborough area down to sort of Swavesey, Haddenham, and then up to sort of down in Market, Wisbeach area, that kind of sense. So it's about 120 miles of main drain, these big long waterways, 500 mile plus of smaller sort of side drains belonging to the internal drainage boards. So a lot of drains to look after, a lot of water, and obviously a lot of people depending on that, farmers, anyone who lives in this area as well. So it's a big job, and it's a big area. Making sure we keep people dry and keep farmers' livelihoods going. And within that, my role as conservation officer is to work with the internal drainage boards, work with landowners to make sure we give wildlife due consideration in our works, which regularly brings us into contact with protected species, things like water voles, otters, badgers, things like that. So my role is to look at that side of things, but also work with a variety of different partners, and again landowners and the drainage boards to try and implement schemes that might benefit wildlife in doing what we do, which is looking after these drains and banks and things. So it's a really interesting job. Yeah,
I mean we'll go into detail into things that you do in a few minutes. From a personal perspective, whenever I've had to phone up Middle Level Commissioners, and I'm not saying it because I'm sat here, but it's just been a company that's just been really responsive. It's been brilliant.
Really
you phone up some organisations and you get fobbed off, or someone will be in touch and they never do. But every single time I've had to phone in or speak to somebody about something, not only has that person got back in contact, but they've taken it seriously. And being a local company for a local person, I just think I'm really impressed with the way Middle Level Commissioners have dealt with things.
Really good to hear. I think possibly there's we're sort of maybe a bit of an invisible force out there. A lot of people will recognise these rivers and drains, but they don't really know what they're doing, who looks after them. So yeah, we don't maybe shout about things as much as we should do, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Right, we're just going to stop for a sec because there's a very strange noise. Can you hear it?
yeah. I think that's the fan in the toilet. This is the air dryer.
Really loud in my headphones. Oh, well, if that was funny, we'll keep that bit in. We might cut that out. Right, let's talk a bit about Mr. Beckenham himself. Not Beckham, but Beckenham.
I wish it was missing the EN in the middle.
Yeah. How did you get into a role like this? Let's go right back to early days. What were your interests when you were a child?
Well, I was really lucky that I had parents that really valued the outdoors, and very early memories of lots of family walks, spending time in the garden, things like that. So that to me, it was definitely part of my life, and it felt quite normal. And my dad was a really keen gardener, and I think that had quite looking back, that had a big impact on me. He, a really keen gardener, so he loved spending time outdoors, and he used to point out birds to me in the garden, just sort of common species, and little things like that definitely stuck in my head. And one of my earliest memories is, I think my dad signed me up to be a young ornithologist club, which was, I think, what the RSPB was running. This would have been in the mid-80s, and used to once a year do this bird count. I can remember sitting in my bedroom and with my dad's binoculars, and he would point things out and we'd jot them down, and vividly remember him pointing out the difference between a mistle thrush and a song thrush. And I just thought that was really, really interesting. I mean, especially interesting now is that mistle thrushes and song thrushes have declined, and to the extent when they're no longer common garden birds. But so those kind of things really stuck with me, and it was just I just loved being outdoors, and it's something I felt very comfortable with. But then moving forward as a teenager, it was absolutely the last thing I cared about. It was really, I still enjoyed those experiences, but my mind was elsewhere, I guess.
Isn't it strange how things get embedded?
Yeah.
And you become a teenager, and then you just your mind goes to mush, doesn't it? You just kind of I don't know what happens, but it's still in the background.
Definitely, and it wasn't until sort of probably my early mid-20s that it started kind of slowly coming back to me. And I don't really know what what it was that triggered it again, but then I just got into it massively. I was obviously sort of looking for something, and I really got into bird watching, which is something that stayed with me ever since. And it just this whole world opened up, and I just absolutely loved it. And from then on, it was just at a time when you're thinking about what am I going to do, what am I going to do for a career. I just always had that in mind, but it wasn't straightforward. It wasn't straightforward. I mean, I went to school. But you talk to the careers advisor there, and they're like, I'm not really sure. Do geography or something, which is what I did, and that was one of my favourite subjects at school. And I went to university briefly, but decided it wasn't what I wanted to do. Ended up working lots of different jobs really. But yeah, it wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that I started getting back into it, and I went back to college, and I did a very practical 2-year course in countryside management in London, and that was fantastic. It was more based on kind of practical experience, lots of field trips, and giving us kind of hands-on experience. And from then on, it just I met people, and I just kind of followed all the opportunities I had. I had a brilliant year working as a residential volunteer for the RSPB on the North Kent Marshes, which is where I'm from. That was unforgettable, and I learnt so much. It was really, really an amazing year, and it just set me up. It just gave me the kind of confidence. I think this is kind of what I want to pursue. And from then on, I just tried to make the most of what opportunities I could get. I worked for London Wildlife Trust for about 5 years in the end, various different kind of project roles in various different kind of sites, often focused on wetlands, which is kind of, again, naturally what I seem to kind of gravitate to. And then about 4 years ago, I moved up to the Fens. My girlfriend's on the Fens. I met her in London, and
Gone downhill from there.
yeah.
Stuck with us.
Well, yeah, but no, she'd always planned to move home, so I was ready for a change. So I said, okay, well, let's do it. And
what do you think because it's a very unique scenery, isn't it?
Definitely. You know what? I mean, I guess coming from North Kent, which is pretty, well, where I was, it's pretty flat and wet north of the North Downs and the estuary and stuff. And that's, that was an area I absolutely loved. So it wasn't a big change in that sense. And I think being a keen bird watcher, before then anyway, I knew the area a little bit. I'd been up here to see the cranes and things like that. Yeah. So I was actually really, really excited. It was, it seemed like a really fascinating landscape to me. And it really is. There's so much here, so much history that it wasn't a huge jump. And I felt like I settled.
We had a couple of days last week. I don't know if you remember. It was really still but sunny, and it was the first frosts we had.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's when the Fens come alive in the autumn.
Yeah,
when we get that first few frosts.
I agree, definitely. It's an autumn-winter place, I think.
It's the light is just amazing, isn't it? Yeah, and you get some incredible sunrises and sunsets.
Yeah, and I love seeing the first sort of hooper swans just drifting in.
And the noise they make.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And we're quite lucky where we sit now is that occasionally we have cranes that fly by as well, and that sound, you can kind of hear it a long, long time before you see them. It just sort of carries on the wind. So
I can hear the swans at night flying over my house.
Wow!
You hear them coming. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the things that certainly has me about the Fens is a lot of its magic is not obvious. You have to look for it. You have to search for it. And then when you find it, you go, oh wow, I didn't know that was there.
Yeah, and I'm really lucky. I get to go to a lot of places that are off the beaten track and quite remote, but it is.
And you find smelly old pike anglers pulling up fish traps. Oh, that's wonderful. I did want to mention one thing as you were talking about ornithology. I've got a very good friend called Guy Eldridge, and this guy is a magician. He's a very keen pipe fly angler. But he used to run bird watching trips, and I'm going to get this wrong, and he's going to tell me off. I'm sure it was to parts of Africa. It was some of the really dangerous parts. It was when a lot of the civil wars were going on, and a lot of his clients were American.
Right.
And Guy is amazing because when you were talking about your childhood, I know that when he's a bit older than us. Well, he's certainly a lot older than you. Excuse me, a bit older than me, and he'll hate me for saying that. But when he was a child, he had a set of woods behind him. Himself and two friends would just learn about the birds and the calls, just some of the birds we have in this country. But he then transferred those skills. So he found very rare birds in the wild by just researching their habitat. And he would take clients and they would trek for days with local guides and he'd listen. And he would just listen. And I've been fishing with him on Chew Valley Reservoir, which is a beautiful reservoir near Bristol. And we've been standing there and he'd go, can you hear that? And I can hear the cars going over the causeway. And I said, no. He goes, listen. I sit there and go, no. He goes, right, you just need to relax and listen. And then you hear, chip, chip. And he go, that's why I mentioned to you earlier. He goes, that's Chettis warbler. They're coming in. I go, and then about an hour later, he go, buzzards. I go, where? He goes, they're here somewhere. I just heard them. And then when you start tuning in, you tune into you forget or you filter the man-made noises. And you actually zone in to the natural side of things. And I found for a long time I had become a bit modern and I was only listening to man-made sounds. But now I can go back to being a child and I can filter. And I think probably being a bird watcher, that's a very important skill.
Definitely. Learning birdsong is such a rewarding thing to do. I mean, it takes time. There's no quick way of doing it really, and it's just spending time outdoors, being patient and kind of engaging with the environment that way. But it opens up so much. I mean, I would say that, probably 80% of the encounters I have with birds is picking them up on sound. First of all, I mean, generally. I mean, in the Fens, it's a bit different because it is very open, so you tend to see them first. But different, more in sort of scrub or woodland. I mean, it's definitely sound that does it. And my girlfriend she'll say that if we're out walking, and I suddenly go quiet, and she's chatting away. I suddenly go quiet and have this sort of vacant look. She's like, "Oh, what have you heard?" Sort of, so I'm always being, told off about that. But
it's a skill. It's a great skill.
Years ago when I was volunteering, someone said to me, "Oh, learn what 5 birds sound like in your garden." So blackbird, blue tit, robin, great tit, and dunnock or something like that. And then you just learn it, enjoy it, just get comfortable with it. And it'll kind of start to sort of settle in. And then once you've got them, you just feel, sort of reassured with them. You'll start to hear other little bits just kind of creeping in, and it just slowly expands like that. All of a sudden you'll hear a greenfinch whiz over or something. You can slowly just kind of start pulling these strands together, and then this knowledge just, it suddenly gets,
I bet. I'm useless with actually recognising birds, but I'm getting better at listening. And where my garden is, it fronts onto the river, and in the summer they talk to each other, don't they? They're communicating.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the pigeons are great to hear, because they're doves. Pigeons, they're doves, and they're communicating. And the smaller birds, you can hear them, and suddenly you hear a shrill. And am I correct in thinking that's an alarm if they see a predator? Could be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and so all these sounds they're making, it's all for a reason. It's it's some form of communication, whether that's to attract a mate, to defend a territory. It might just be a kind of a contact call, sort of keep in touch with the flock, or perhaps communicate that there's a food resource around somewhere. And then, like you say, to warn others of predators. And one of the best ways of finding birds of prey and things like that is often the first thing that I'm aware of is the change in the surrounding sounds. There'll be a sudden flurry of smaller bird sounds, and then silence, and automatically. So then I'm thinking sparrowhawk or peregrine or something like that, or or you'll hear the crows and the gulls making a particularly kind of aggravated call, and then I know, sure enough, there'll be a buzzard or something cruising around.
Yeah,
so
it's the silence that when you
there's some kind of snap.
Yeah, chitter chat, and suddenly when you go because I love owls, and birds of prey are my favourite. And obviously, I suppose being a pycanker, it's kind of inbred in me, but. I can zone into the chitter chatter, and then when it goes silent, I'm looking, going, there's something happening. I'm so useless with it all, but I've got a few basics, but you guys are just, it's amazing how individual bird sounds and the habitats. You go, well, that should be there, but maybe not. And there is
so much.
Yeah.
Friends ask me, how do I do it, whatever. But and they probably think it's more complicated than it is. But it is, It is, if you become familiar with a habitat, you learn the kind of things you find there, and you can then automatically pretty much discount a lot of stuff. So it's, focus on the things that you can see, and then other things will come.
That's a great skill. And obviously, I suppose that was embedded all those years ago.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Definitely.
And this is what I always go back to, having been a school teacher, you see, I always go back to kids today. And I actually feel a bit sorry for kids today. I think they've got too many distractions that are technology-based, whereas they should just go outside and play.
Yeah, definitely.
And discover. It's miss out on so much because they're sitting in the bedroom playing on a...
I mean, that's very relevant for me now. I've got a very young son who was born this year. So, things like that I'm sort of quite conscious of, and what kind of, upbringing, relationship with the outdoors do I hope he has. And yeah, I mean, it does seem that there are so many more distractions now. And
yeah, it can't be great. I think kids need to get out, play, get dirty, and
absolutely,
fall and learn to get back up again.
Yeah, that's it. My little one was out chewing leaves the other day. It's probably all right.
He'll be fine. Building up the bacteria, he'll be absolutely fine. Right, that's great. Okay, we're overlapping a few things, but that's the way this rolls, really. Obviously, your role, I would imagine, is very varied and at times not that specific, but I should imagine also at times you have certain initiatives that you are fulfilling. So I suppose explaining your role is going to be quite difficult, but do you want to give it a go?
Yeah, I can try and do it briefly. So it is lots of different strands to it. Some of the strands, it's things like, so there's kind of more sort of admin-based stuff, and that might be looking at a planning development that's come to me for some opinion on what should be done. So that's particularly for things that are affecting the drainage board. So it could be like reprofiling or culverting a drain, or a little development is going in next to an IDB drain. So I need to make sure the board are aware of the things they need to consider and sort of pass that on to the developers. So there's that kind of side of things.
I'd never considered that.
Yeah, no, that's quite a big thing. That's a really important thing,
is,
especially working with the protected species. And my role is to work with these boards and make sure that they're informed about what they need to consider. So there's that kind of side of things. Working with partners, attending kind of meetings or Zoom meetings and things like that. So that could be things like the Great Fen or Cambridgeshire Acre and things, and making sure we're kind of sharing knowledge and supporting their work as well. And then there's the more outside things, and I'm really lucky in that the bulk of my role is probably outdoors, pretty solitary. So I have not really been impacted too much by the lockdowns this year. And then various different projects we have going on. Mostly to do with kind of like these protected species. So I do eel monitoring. It takes up a bit of time every week. The water vole surveys that we know, which is how we met. Barn owl monitoring as well. So lots of these kind of key species.
I'm going to have to interrupt. I've got to ask you some questions.
Sure.
How do you monitor the eels?
So we're really lucky. So the main pumping station for our system is St Germans, which is out near King's Lynn. So that's sort of at the head of the main drain. And around, what are we now? About 10 years ago, maybe slightly less than that, an eel pass was built.
That's right.
So this was kind of instigated by the eel regulations that is in UK law. So that's about identifying these barriers to eel migration and putting in place practical solutions to allow them to pass by. So we were building a brand new pumping station there. And so the opportunity arose to put this eel pass in, and it took a bit of time, but it's working really, really well, and it has been for a number of years now. I go up regularly to watch for the flow of eels kind of coming into this pass, and they drop into a well essentially, and that allows me to extract them, measure them, weigh them, and then send them on their way into the sort of upstream of the pumping station into the fresh water. So it's it's the highlight of my week. I absolutely love doing it.
I was going to say that must be fascinating.
They're an amazing species.
I'm going to ask you another question.
Yeah.
Can we come with you? Can we video?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because this would be brilliant for people to see. I spoke to Rob Hewison about 6 months ago. He had a trip round St Germans pump station.
Okay, yeah.
And they used to do, I don't know if I suppose COVID, it would stop, but they might start doing those again. And I'd love to do a podcast there, because it's quite an amazing feat of engineering, isn't it?
It is, yeah. No, I'm sure we can sort that out.
Perfect.
I'd have to check with the boss. But yeah, no, I'm sure we can do that. So
that would be so interesting to see.
Absolutely.
You see things on like BBC Wonderful World, Natural World, but to actually see it live.
That's it. And I mean, eels in particular, this incredible species, been around 100 million years or longer.
What amazing!
So they're kind of like genuine dinosaurs, and they're critically endangered. And certainly, a place like the Fens, they're entwined. They're entwined in the history of the Fens. People used to make their livelihoods on catching them, but that is much less the case now. So it's really important that we have this opportunity to kind of to study them and see the numbers that are kind of coming in. It's lovely to be able to kind of release them upstream as well, and think that 15, 20 years time maybe they'll then just be thinking about coming back. So they spend a long time in the middle level system, hopefully getting big and fat, and then wriggling their way back up to the pumping station.
I know John Spalton obviously very well, and I know two eel fishermen, their family of eel fishermen in Bungay.
Okay.
And I was on a little boat. This is like a 7-foot long plastic tub. And being towed behind them. This must have been 7 or 8 years ago. And they were showing me how they set the nets and how they do the fishing. And obviously I was sworn to secrecy as to where they were setting. But they have never had so many eels. And the areas they're catching them are before the pumps. And what they're telling me
yeah.
is there's an awful lot of damage done to the fish by the pumps because they can't get back up
Right.
to their spawning grounds. And no, not spawning grounds. Sorry, 'cause they spawn in the Sargasso. Back to their, because they spawn in Sargasso and they come back to areas they.
It's mind blowing.
Yeah, how do they do
about it?
But they can't get back up because the pumps are smashing them.
Yeah. That's
So
it.
obviously you've got a very important role with this.
Well, that's it. I mean, so that's what these regulations is, to try and make these pumping stations fish friendly. So St. Germans is, so the pass lets them get around it upstream, so they go from salt water into the fresh water, and that's where they'll spend, their sort of teenage kind of adult lives in a sense for 15, 20 years, something like that. Then they'll start their migration back. They kind of go through a bit of a change. They'll change colour. So they'll go from, so in the spring we see the glass eels, which are tiny little bootlace things that turn up, and then they get slightly older. You get these kind of pigmented elvers that are a little bit bigger, they're sort of sandy brown in colour. But by the time they're making their return migration, they're kind of silvery, nice kind of silvery white bellies and a big eye, and they'll then make their way back up. And obviously the only way out is through the pumping station again. But the pumping station is designed to be fish friendly, so it's sort of there's spaces built into it that allow them to kind of get through and out the other side again.
Yeah.
So, and the EA have done surveys in the past to test the effectiveness of it, and as far as I know, it was working okay. So
yes, that must be, because obviously it's a healthy system, but I think there's a lot of pumps that just smash them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the previous one would have been doing that. I mean, it's really important that we've identified what this this major problem is, and slowly it seems we're kind of getting there. But it is really important to
In my head, I've got this wonderful image of get Spolt in the wild somewhere, have videos of you down at St. Germans, just talk about it. It would just make.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I bumped into John at St. Germans fairly recently, and I was checking the well there, and he came up and he was having a look. And he was like, "Oh, that's a big one there." Got his eyes on that one.
For me, it would make fascinating viewing just to pull the whole thing together. It would be.
This year has been really, really good.
Yeah.
It's been I started in 2018. It's been the best year since then. And looking at the data, it's probably on course to be the best year we've had since 2014, which was a really incredible year, judging by the data I've seen. So, which is really good. I mean, it's natural to have these good years and bad years, and these cycles in the population. But this year, particularly this summer, it's been really, really good.
Oh, that's good news, isn't it?
I've been doing several runs with my buckets up and down the hill. So, I mean, conversely, the number of elvers we've had has been quite low. But hopefully that is just
it's a trough
again. Hopefully it's a trough and it'll come back up again. But across Europe, the European eel population is really, really struggling. It's really, really low. So hopefully we can kind of start to turn the tide on that. And I mean, when you have a migratory species, it covers such a vast distance. There are so many things on the route that can. I mean, it's got to cross a massive ocean and deal with whatever climate change is doing to that, whether that's shifting the currents that it relies on. It then reaches the European landmass and it has to swim up rivers that are dammed or whatever off, and huge amounts of trafficking happening around Europe, around the world. Is pollution. It's got a lot of stuff that's going against it. So when I see one of the little ones there, I'm just it's amazing to think what that's gone through already.
That is incredible, isn't it? Just to get there. Incredible species. Now, obviously, you discover what's in the well for the eels. How would you monitor barn owls?
So in the middle level, we have in excess of 100 barn owl boxes that we've put up. So these are purpose-built boxes for nesting. And a lot of these were funded by the internal drainage boards, so making a voluntary kind of donation towards, the conservation of of an iconic species that a lot of people love to see, and that this area is, really important for. It's a real stronghold for them. So barn owls are Schedule 1 species, so we have to make sure we have the licenses in place, but I work with a couple of volunteers who are fantastic. They give up a lot of their time and energy to go out and starting in June time and then working throughout into the autumn to go and check all these boxes We work out which ones have got barn owls in, and then these 2 volunteers they're licensed ringers, so some of the barn owls we ring, and that way we can, if anything, they ever get seen again, or sadly if they turn up dead, we can take a bit of information from that owl to work out, its life story a little bit. So lots of time shimmying up ladders, reaching into these murky boxes and kind of seeing what's going on. So
that's incredible, because often you see these big constructions and they're big, aren't they? And it's funny how you find a little hot spot near a barn owl box. So you go, that's a good area. But I was also wondering, we're going to mention several species that you need help with from people listening later on the podcast. Barn owl wasn't the ones we listed. Is it going to be one?
Always like to hear records of barn owls, particularly this year. They've had a really, really poor year.
Really?
Last year was a bumper year for barn owls, and again, we just mentioned you get these kind of cycles with a lot of species, and that is quite normal. And and it's the same for barn owls. That's known to be the case. Last year, bumper year, we did a second round of checks in sort of August, September time, and most boxes were having second broods.
Really?
Which is a sign of good condition adults, plenty of food. This year, not so much. So occupancy this year, is something around 25% of boxes, which is really low. It might even be less than that. We're still looking at some of the stuff, but hopefully next year they bounce back. But it's often the case, a sudden influx of young barn owls, last autumn, it'll impact the kind of, the amount of prey that's available.
Yes.
And then so you're going to get this dip. And also as well, I think, potentially what we're seeing is, unfortunately, we're kind of getting these quite intense weather events at really unfortunate times. So it's often when adults have got, growing youngsters in the box, and then if you get 3 days of really heavy wind, rain, things like that, it can have a massive knock-on effect. And I think this year we have had some periods of...
We had some big storms in August, didn't we?
Yeah, which is a really bad time.
Yeah.
Rain's less of an issue, but heavy wind, hard winds and stuff,
Really?
is really hard for barn owls. So
is that because they can't get out and hunt?
Yeah, effectively, they just can't get out and get the food in.
Yeah.
So we have seen that a bit this year. There's definitely had an impact.
So the adults can't go and hunt. They can't feed the young. The young then die in the nest. And
barn owls have big broods, and part of that is this strategy of of hoping that the more you have, some will survive, but and also as well they start incubating on the first egg, so they're going to hatch at slightly different intervals as well.
Yeah.
So they're not all feeding lots of very hungry chicks of the same age. You can naturally get some that are they're kind of a bit smaller, and they may be the ones that suffer first, but it's again, so there's a little strategy they've got for dealing with that. But yeah, this year was a hard year for barn owls, so a lot of places where I would expect to see them, I haven't seen them this year, so it would be nice to get records of...
One of my favourite things I see when I'm out pike fishing early in the morning, I know on certain stretches I go, there's a resident barn owl.
Oh, that's good.
And you just...
Yeah.
Obviously, like you said, particularly as long as it's not too windy, on those really still mornings, there's nothing better than just watching the owl come.
Yeah, that's it. There's a couple of spots near here that are always, were really reliable for seeing them for me. But this autumn, I just haven't seen them, which suggests that they didn't have a very good breeding season or something. So.
Cool. Okay. Well, we'll get onto this later, because obviously the Fend and Guardian scheme, part of its role is trying to promote looking after the. It's looking at water voles, barn owls, all sorts of things. So we'll mention this in detail a bit later. What other you've got a mink initiative on at the minute? I think you were telling me about.
Yeah, that's right. So we do. We have a real focus on invasive species within the waterways in the fens, and mink is unfortunately something we still have a big problem with. It's not a particularly new problem. We know we've had mink for decades, really, ever since they were brought in for fur farming, things like that, and they started escaping, or whether they were released intentionally, whatever. But they started breeding in the wilds in around the 50s and 60s, something like that. But they're still very much established within our drains. And we've been doing work, over the last decade with my predecessor as well to try and, monitor and deal with the mammal. But still very much here. So this year we've had a real focus on trying to find out, where we're finding mink. Technology has changed a bit, so we've now got these fantastic remote monitored rafts and things like that we can put out under welfare guidelines. If you put a mink trap out, you have to check it every 24 hours. But these new devices will basically monitor it for you, and I get a text message and an email when something something goes off. Doesn't tell me what's gone in there, but it saves me a lot of time and energy running around, money on petrol and things like that. So that's been really, really effective at showing where particular hotspots are. And this so what we're contributing to here is is effectively a national strategy to try and eradicate mink.
I haven't seen many mink actually when I've been fishing for a long time back. In the 80s and 90s, a lot of mink.
That's what I hear.
I haven't seen a mink for a long time.
I'm quite pleased to hear that. But so this year we've caught quite a few, and again I have some volunteers who help me out with that. They do a great job and keeping an eye on things. But
I do know where a few are, and I shall mention to you.
I would love to hear. Because it's not so. I should say why we focus on mink. So mink are pretty much the number one predator of water vole. That's their favourite food.
Right. Okay.
So water vole is a native mammal, which nationally is really struggling. The population has crashed dramatically. Luckily, in the fens, we seem to have a pretty good population, quite resilient. But as ever, there are lots and lots of threats facing it. Not only sort of droughts and things in spring and summer, but you then have this invasive predator that's there as well. So it's seen as a very, very achievable thing we can focus on to help this this wonderful native mammal is to eradicate mink. So that's effectively what we. So the mink they wouldn't naturally be found here. These are North American mink brought in for
fur trade,
basically, and we see it with a lot of other species that get out and people think it'll never last, but they weather it and they've survived really well, endured, but at the expense of this now increasingly rare native mammals.
So let's talk about the water vole, because it's very important to the ecosystem, isn't it? Because barn owls feed on water voles.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they
so. Yeah, I mean,
everything's linked.
It is exactly.
Yeah. Now, obviously, when I found you hiding in the bulrushes, you obviously you've got water vole traps, and that's how you.
Yeah,
is that how you're trying to find
not traps? They're,
sorry,
that's okay. I should clarify that.
Yeah, they're not traps at all. They're like boards.
They're just little boards. Yeah, little rafts. Yeah. I put out, and I have them throughout the system, and they're just points at which I can revisit during the year, just to kind of gauge, whereabouts the water voles are, where they are.
But you need them to walk over it.
Yeah.
This is what you explained to me on the bank.
Luckily, water voles they're pretty messy. They love making a mess, so they'll sit
and
somewhere.
finding your boards.
Yeah, they're pretty effective. They love making a mess. They'll sit somewhere, they'll chew some grass, or they'll leave some droppings. And these are the two. So these are the two field signs I'm looking for. I mean, I rarely see water voles. I mean, twice, 2 or 3 times a year if I'm lucky. Well, I see a water vole swimming down the drain or something. So what I'm looking for is the field signs they leave behind. Yes. And luckily they're sort of they're quite easy to find. So the little kind of pellets that the little
let's do
the pellets they leave.
Let's explain to everybody, because Peter, I could speak to you for hours, and so
you don't stop me. I'll just waffle on.
In my head, I keep thinking, I've got a million questions. So. Everyone listening, I do apologise, but this is too much fun, and I don't apologise at all. Right, let's go into habitat of a water vole. So where would you expect to find them?
So they're fully riparian, so riverbanks, basically. The only exception to that is a population in Scotland that turned up on a housing estate, but I'm not going to talk about that.
Does it need to be riverbanks that doesn't have too much of a fluctuating level?
Ideally, yes. So they like a nice stable water level, which in the fens can be a bit of a problem in some areas, especially especially when you kind of get very, very dry summers. And I think that this year that's probably what I saw. They were a bit more mobile in places that had previously been really good. I wasn't finding them, but in areas where the drains were at a slightly higher level, that's where they were going to. So yeah, ideally, nice stable water level for them. They'll have a burrow, so they normally have two entrances, one just above the water level, and then one under the water, so that they need to get away from predators and things like that. And these burrows, they can be quite well hidden, but they're quite a sizable hole in the bank. I could, almost just sort of about squeeze my fist in, something like that.
So what we're talking about 8 to 10 centimetres?
Yeah, something like that. I could get, so about three fingers. It's something like that. That's what I'd be. Does that kind of helps it stand apart from other mammal holes that I might find, bank voles and things like that, which is a little bit smaller rats. So rat holes are kind of a similar size, but again, rats are pretty messy and they'll eat lots of spoil outside and things. So water vole burrows, quite neat, hidden just above the water level. And so that's a good sign that you've got population there, or at least a territorial mammal. So they burrow back into the bank. Can be up to 1 metre, something like that. They start breeding in the spring, so that's usually when I start going out looking for them. And it's a very long season as well, so it'll go throughout into the summer when you start getting the dispersal of the younger voles.
So do they live in communities, or are they a breeding pair, or
breeding pair, but quite territorial?
Really?
So males and females will chase off others and things like that. So they'll have little. I think they say it's about 100 metres, coming up to 100 metres of a bit of riverbank, something like that. But you do get overlapping bits within that. So I do tend to find little kind of clusters of.
And what do they eat?
Fully vegetarian, so grasses.
Are they?
Any kind of emergent aquatic vegetation.
Do they
sort
like
of rushes, things like that?
Fresh, as in.
They love fresh.
New.
They love fresh.
Yeah.
Which is really good for us because we have to maintain these drains. If we didn't, a lot of them would get kind of overgrown, which is a problem for navigators going through, problem for kind of storage capacity. So our regular maintenance of it kind of keeps areas of nice fresh growth every spring, and they tend to really like that. So
I suppose you have to be quite careful with the guys going reed cutting and. So how this just popped into my head. How do you now? So you must have a big input to where guys are cutting the banks and cutting the weeds back. Do you say you can't hit that area, or do they have to do it in a certain way?
I mean, we're really lucky. We have a long established sort of conservation plan for how we manage our drains. That we review it regularly to sort of make sure things are working. And generally speaking, we have a softly approach to doing that. So hopefully if you go out and look at our drains, you should see a little kind of buffer along the the toe of the bank of rushes and things like that. So we try not to cut that, basically to avoid impacting water voles. And so all our guys have been trained and shown what to do, what to look out for, so that helps ensure that the water voles are going to be there for years to come.
Cool. So you get some drainage boards that are just, and if it lives, cut it down.
Yeah,
And
I think
particularly back. I'm thinking about the 90s.
Yeah, that's
There's
it.
certain drains I used to fish, and they become lunar landscapes.
Yeah.
And you go, what's happened here?
Yeah.
But obviously now,
I think there's definitely been a
changed.
shift. I go around and by and large, things
Has to.
look different from what I've seen of the pictures and things of that time. So
Let's go back to the water vole. So when you talk about droppings, are they like little black pellets? Like
less. I mean, they can be black if they've been there a little while. Often it can be greeny, sort of olivey brown, something like that. And they're basically like little tiny sausages, little kind of rounded ends.
what size? Roughly?
How big are they? They're probably, up to about 1 centimetre, something like that.
Right.
So quite big, quite long. Yeah, quite long, quite fat. Something like that. So actually, when you get down on the edges, and these things they do stand out, and like I said, they're kind of like a waxy green or olivey brown, something like that.
Droppings are a really good way of identifying different animals.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's weird how much time I spend looking at
Droppings.
animal droppings. But yeah, it is a really useful way of of telling what's around, and I can from that I can kind of tell like relative abundance in a particular area, and that's really good to me. I can then tell the IDB, this is a really, really good drain. just bear that in mind. Maintaining it and things like that, and so it's good.
That is amazing. It's just because these water voles they're not very big, are they? And they're
not really,
and
no.
they don't really like human interference. They know you're there.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why it's a pretty rare event to to see water voles these days. They're very wary. I mean, often you'll hear the kind of plop into the water.
Yes.
Quite a distinctive sound.
Yeah.
So I hear that quite a lot. So think that it makes me kind of keep an eye.
When I'm
And one
pike
time I did hear that. I actually saw one swimming.
Yeah.
It was a really clear channel. It was swimming up it. It was fantastic.
When I'm pike fishing and I'm leapfrogging along the drain, I take limited gear, so I might even just 2 or 3 rods out, and that's it. And I've got a rucksack and maybe a chair, and I'm being very quiet. Once you've moved and settled down, it's amazing. 15, 20 minutes later, you start hearing rustlings. You see things, and you see so much.
Yeah,
and, water voles.
I think definitely. I think there's I'm not a fisherman. I don't know much about fish, which is a bit of a confession. And I honestly thought, I've never thought in my life I'd be invited on a fishing podcast. But I'm really glad you have.
Well, most fishermen are so into nature, and it's amazing how many guys just want to get out and just
absolutely.
into the wilderness. And this fence is awesome because you can just walk miles. And you can discover so many things.
Definitely.
And,
I think that there are similarities, with fishing and bird watching as well. You spend a lot of time sat in one place waiting for something to happen, waiting for that right moment and things. And
we've all got this overlapping interest, and it's important that we all pull together and make sure it blossoms.
Yeah,
it's very important. Yeah, because you can't see into the water.
No.
And people expect fish just to be there.
Yeah.
And they're not.
Yeah. No.
Many a reason, and we have to make this abundantly clear. And a very strong fishery will have a very strong bankside presence as well with the wildlife. It's intrinsically linked, isn't it? You can't
absolutely.
get away from this. So
No.
it's like barn owls are dependent on water voles, and if the mink are destroying the water voles, the barn owls are going to suffer. So it's all linked.
Yeah,
And,
definitely.
I just think it's just trying to bring this home to people, and they take a bit more interest in it, which it's probably there, but with everything else people have on their agenda, it gets perhaps pushed to the back.
We all have this mutual interest, and we want to enjoy these thriving landscapes and things like that. So, let's work together.
I did say to Peter, when he's talking, I'm going to write down loads of ideas, because every time you say something else pops into my head. And I've forgotten half the things I was going to ask you because I was busy writing. There's one thing I need to ask you, and this is from a personal point of view, and I think I've got this slightly wrong, but I see lots of water rats, or what I call... They're smaller than what I would call like a domestic rat.
Okay.
Is there a difference, or is it just me seeing different sized rats?
I think it's probably different sized rats. I mean, there's a variety of mammals that, inhabit that kind of, the riverbank. There is a water shrew. We have bank vole, obviously water vole, common rat, things like that. All varying different sizes.
The ones I see in the water are, and listeners aren't going to know what I'm doing here, probably 30 centimetres with the tail.
That's a rat. That's what we call,
But they're not any bigger.
No.
And I've seen, as I go past the ship, I came back last week, and there were 2 actually tucked in above the waterline behind the rudder of a boat. It was very bizarre.
Yeah.
But I see them a lot along the banks, along Neame Parade, and further along West End, and daylight as well. I'm thinking, this is strange. Why are there so many rats out in daylight and quite happily swimming?
Yeah.
And I thought, and they're not monsters.
No,
but they're just all about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean,
I don't know.
I mean, water voles are kind of common. Brown rats. What do? They coexist. You get them in the same, in the same habitats and the same stretches of riverbank. So I have to be a bit careful sometimes, working out what's what. And I obviously don't want to be holding rat droppings and stuff. So, I take precautions there. But often you get, the rats are active for a bit, then they'll go and the water voles will come out and they'll have a period of time of feeding or whatever, and then they'll go back in the boat and the rats come out. So, they do coexist. But
I don't know if they're juvenile ones.
Maybe the diet, maybe they're eating something that's, maybe they're not just relying on kind of scraps found and they're just quite healthy or.
Yeah, don't know. I've seen a lot recently. in my head, I thought, is there a subspecies? There isn't. I thought there's not, is there?
No, I don't think so.
No, I've made it up. Yeah. There you go. Right, okay, let's just sort of mesh this with the Fenland Guardian scheme, because this is one of the reasons we've done this. Not the main reason, just one of the reasons. Now, the Fenland Guardian scheme looks at lots of different strands, and one of them is protecting the banks, not just the fish. So obviously we're looking at litter and fly tipping, and we've just started an initiative with the Angling Trust with Anglers Against Litter, so that will be ongoing. That'll be good. And also, when I spoke to you about 2 weeks ago, Peter, you mentioned about a water warden scheme you tried to get off the ground last year?
Well, it's an idea I've had,
right?
And obviously sort of COVID came along this year and kind of scuppered it a little bit. But what I'd love to be able to do is to have, volunteers who are interested in almost sort of adopting a local stretch of, waterway, protect maybe where they walk the dog or they walk regularly, and just being able to kind of report back to me on any interesting sightings they find, or like you say, fly tipping events or any other issues they've got. It would just be a brilliant way of, finding out what's going on, getting some really important data about, key species and just engaging people as well. In
we're going to thrash this out as we're talking, because this is new, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. I mean,
as we're talking about it's actually happening.
Yeah.
So, Peter's just explained basically the Guardian scheme, but he needs feedback on certain species, and obviously there's this crossover with the fly tipping and the litter. So, people listening, I think we're going to run with this and just see where it takes us.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
So we've got Guardians linked to different stretches, and something that I'd like Peter to do, and I kind of mentioned to him before we started doing this podcast, is it'd be great to do some kind of like sessions maybe down here with guardians, families, children, probably when we get through the next batch of COVID and see where we go with everything. Yeah. So if Peter can do some kind of mini lectures explaining what to look for, we could perhaps have children coming down to
love to do that,
middle-level commissioner's office with the parents, and we can link it to the Guardian scheme, so we're kind of like all working together. It's not our scheme, it's the community scheme. So I think if you're happy doing that, that would be great.
Absolutely. We can do some ditch dipping as well or something like that.
Yeah, we just do it together. And if you want to call it, be part of the scheme. And we'll just open it all up.
Yeah,
I mean,
great.
The more people we have in, the better. I think it'd be great to get the primary schools linked in.
Yes.
I know you wanted to do a lot of, mention the eels. I think that when I spoke to Leighton, who's 9, do you remember he was on the boat?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And he went, that would be brilliant. So obviously we've got lots of ideas. So we basically need listeners to help, because these ideas are great, but when there's 2 people doing it, it's hard work. When there's 100 people doing it, it's easy, isn't it? And I think we need everybody on board with this. So what we'd like, even if you're not a guardian on the scheme, just get in touch. We want people to get in touch, either get in touch with myself, get in touch with Peter, and we'll put the way to contact him at the end of the podcast, and I'll add it into a link on the descriptions. So he's more than open for people just contacting him directly. Now, there are several species you wanted people to help with, didn't you? So do you want to go through them?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about some of the kind of iconic species earlier on. Always good to hear about, barn owls, things like that. Obviously, they've had a really, tough year, so it would be good. Hopefully, we can kind of see them bouncing back. Kingfishers as well, a really popular species for anyone walking along the drains and things like that. Really kind of, really.
Have you seen the one down here? There's one.
I hear them sometimes.
We've had them
zipping across the car park as well. Yeah, it's amazing.
I was down there the other night, and there's a kingfisher up and down, and Nina, my partner, when she comes around, she can get the kingfisher to actually land on the fence.
Amazing. Well, my predecessor did a lot of work to try and encourage kingfishers, to nest around the mid-level system, but. For an electric blue bird, they're quite tricky to monitor. So I try and keep records, during the breeding season of where I find them. But it would be lovely to be able to get build up a picture of what the population is like here. We think it's really good, but it would be lovely to have records and.
So
pictures
you want people just to tell you where they've seen them?
Yeah, or send a photo in, something like that would be great. Yeah, water bowls we talked a lot about. Always really good to have water bowl records. Really really important to keep that going. And we have a big focus on invasive species as well. So American mink, is a key one at the moment. So welcome all records of mink in the middle level system. We talk things like mitten crab, crayfish. I get very few records of this, so it would be interesting to sort of see where they're getting to. Floating pennywort, which is an invasive aquatic plant that forms dense mats on the on the surface of the
This
water.
is hot at the minute, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a really big concern because if this gets into the system, it's very, very difficult to eradicate. It takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and it affects a lot of different people. Obviously, not just from our point of view of maintaining the bank structures and the flood capacity, things like that. So navigators, boaters, people using the system for that, fishermen. Any other kind of leisure users of the system. It's it's really a real problem.
I think to explain to people, this pennywort, it will literally just spread across the drain, won't it? And along the drain, and it will suffocate the sunlight out of the system.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's the biggest problem, isn't it?
It'll push, it'll travel long distances, and it'll push any, things living under there out, or.
Okay. So if people find pennywort, and hopefully we won't yet, but it's coming, isn't it? Because it's close by on different systems.
Potentially seems inevitable.
Yeah.
But
what should they do?
We really hope not. They can call the Environment Agency. They've got a hotline for these things, and maybe we can include that in the.
Yeah, that's 0800 80 70 60.
There you go.
I know this off by heart because
what a
obviously we have to. I tell you what, the Environment Agency have been brilliant. They're getting really involved with this scheme as well, and I'm not going to say too much at the minute, but there are things afoot, so this is really good as well. So, but yeah, it's their hotline.
So you can call them, you can call us, you can contact me, and we'll make sure we get these any occurrences looked at, and dealt with if necessary.
Yeah,
so.
Cool. So any invasive species, email you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and obviously with the better things like the water vole, the kingfish, and the barn owl. Yeah.
Anything. I love to get any sightings really from around the place. So.
But this all helps because you can then pull it together and.
Definitely. Yeah. I keep records of all all this stuff, and it helps me build up a picture. And I can take data like this, and then I can go to the board and say, okay, well this is an important area for this. Can we think about managing it in this sense or something? So yeah, Brilliant. It's really good to know.
Cool. Okay, we'll give Peter's email address in a moment. So just to reconfirm to people, we're trying to map out how things may go in the future with the partnership that we've got that is building, and I just think it'd be great for listeners to send in comments of what they'd like, because I think this is really important, and this has been quite slow in getting people to comment, and we're just now getting a trickle of questions that come in every week, and anglers commenting, and people who aren't anglers listening to the podcast, which is great. So I think we need to say to people, look, Peter wants people to help, and he wants to spread the conservation side of things massively, but he can't do it alone, and he needs everybody to help him. So if you're a school teacher and you think, I can push this, get in touch. If you're someone who just takes a dog for a walk and you want to get involved, get in touch, because there is so much scope for people to help volunteer and just have a massive input to what's happening locally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I just think the opportunity is there. And I think for youngsters, we go back to the beginning of when we were talking, schools have so many different things to hit that when we were at school, or certainly when I was at school, you could have time for projects. I remember when I was at primary school, we actually redug the primary school pond, and we had newts in our pond. So we then started a colony of newts in the school pond.
Amazing.
And that's what you just do things like this, don't you? Because it's just what you do. But modern society, this time is just so taken away doing different things.
I think this year as well, it's shown just to a lot of people just how important having access and a bit of outdoor time space is. It's so good for mental health.
Oh yes.
Being able to breathe, being able to relax. You don't even have to have a garden. You've got a local park or a balcony or something like that. There's little ways of engaging with it, but it's really important, I think.
And it's also important meeting people who are into the environment, because they tend to be calm, relaxing people to talk to, like yourself. It is. It's fantastic. If you don't spread your wings and meet people with different interests, it can become a bit claustrophobic. And you're right, with COVID-19, it's been a difficult year for a lot of people, and the outdoors is a great release. It really is. Right, Peter, do you want to hit everybody with your email?
Yeah, it is peter.beckenham@middlelevel.gov.uk.
Awesome. I will put a link in the description to this podcast, so we'll have that in there. This has been brilliant. I have
really
cut out
man.
so many things because it could be a 5-hour podcast. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention?
I don't think so. It's been a pleasure talking to you, so thanks for having me on.
I think this will be one of many things. Like I said, I just want to get down St Germans with my video camera and seal trap.
We're going to the eels sometime.
That would be
We'll
brilliant.
talk eels.
Peter, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Andy.
That's been lovely. Thanks a lot.